Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. And certainly, you know, while you're talking about a lot of Northeast outages, the Northwest has quite a few outages, and you know, over the past few years, they seem to have multiplied. We had nearly 300,000 customers across the region that were impacted, and we're talking about many days. In fact, I had one constituent who wrote me and said, quote, "As we stretch into the 5th day of power outages with the temperatures dropping into the 20s in the evenings, I know this is the first major outage that most of the rest of the people have experienced so far this year, but it's the worst. And so my power has gone out over 5 times in the last 30 days, usually out for 24 hours. So, you know, these are people who have been impacted many times, and I'm certainly a big fan. We've instituted a new Doppler radar system there that's state-of-the-art technology now that the rest of the nation is implementing, and it's giving us more predictability, and we need to do a lot, as we were talking about with last week's hearing on just rise at sea level. We need to have a more weather-ready nation. There's lots of things we can do to make sure that we have the information from a scientific perspective about what the impacts are going to be, and then actually plan for them. And but you got to have the information first, then local governments, law enforcement, responders, everybody can develop the plan. But in this case, you know, over the last decade, we have seen, you know, a huge increase in these outages due to extreme weather events. And some estimates are, so a strong investment in grid, obviously in smart grid and distributed generation, in backup generation, and things that would help us basically diversify and build redundancy. Some people think that building that future system would be somewhere between 17 and $24 billion a year over the next 20 years. Well, if you look at what that might actually reduce in estimates, you know, something outages are costing us somewhere around $40 billion per year. So how do you look at this issue from an investment perspective? I look at some of those numbers and say, geez, a 10-year investment in modernizing the grid and getting distributed generation and getting, you know, some of these other investments in place would pay back over a short time period the cost that it is taking us to deal with all these outages, to say nothing of the impacts that we're having on consumers.
It's a very good point. With respect to the economic impact, there is significant economic impact to the country during these events. I know that NOAA estimated that Hurricane Katrina was 105, make sure I got my units right, $105 billion in economic damage. And so it is, how do we look at financing investments in the infrastructure over time to minimize the impact to the economy and also minimize any sort of impact from these events. So what I would look at is a continued steady improvement in our infrastructure, acknowledging if we could have better data and information, then we actually can fine-tune where the technology improvements can get the biggest benefit or the biggest impact, the biggest bang for the buck. So what we really need to do is actually continue to collect the data and build the analytical capability so we can start developing those correlations and prioritize the investment in our infrastructure. So we can look at where do we get the most value from composite poles, from guide wires, from distributed generation, and looking at microgrids. Where has the intensity of storms been increasing, and look at, should we be building the same and using the same technologies after our hurricane, or should we be looking to place improved technologies on the system? Right now, when we rebuild, it is the same technologies that's being put back on the system to the extent that the costs are equal. So it is an investment strategy that has to go hand in hand with the developing of rate structures and rates at the distribution level.
But do you think that that number analysis, like a 10-year, you know, time period for payback, is, do you think that's realistic, doable? You think it can be done sooner? You think, I hear what you're saying. You want to do it smartly. You want to invest in the right technology. You want to see what matters. But I feel like because of that, the reason why you're here today and we're having this hearing is because a lot of people are frustrated that not enough is happening at the state and local levels. So we want to see more action. We'd love, you know, your agency to play a more leadership role, but you're talking about doing this incremental analysis. And I think what we have to get down to is some analogy, at least maybe to like weatherization and the investment we make in weatherization and the time period for payback. We have to start basically putting out there what we think, how quickly the investment will pay dividends to us. And I think if we do, then I think we'll get much more aggressive results at the local level in pushing people to make these investments for us.
I agree with your point, and the discussion is how fast should we invest, and at what level can the consumer, the economy tolerate with respect to that investment. The money that's required is significant, so how should we plan for the investments that are required and manage those difficult funding situations?
Well, I think from our state's perspective, we've had two of these, what someone would call 100-year events back to back, doing devastating economic damage, you know, to the state. And now you start talking about, you know, all sorts of businesses and industries that are impacted. You look at, you know, the tornado that may have hit the Boeing facility in the Midwest. And, you know, these are all issues of, if we are seeing more severe weather, how are we going to best prepare for it? And I think a grid that's much more reliable and resilient is going to be a key part of that. So I thank the chairman for this hearing.